Here today on House Bill 538. We do have an amendment to that bill. Chairman Seltzer, do you want to tell us about your bill and your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I sure can. And I appreciate your consideration again today. The LC version base that the substitute we're working off of is LC 280240S. That was a substitute we developed that had intended to get all the updates from our last committee discussion integrated. It included everything but this amendment we've got. So if the amendment would be added, it would include all the policy things this subcommittee asked for in our last hearing. So if it pleases the chair, I do have copies of 0240 for you to take a look at. I've provided that to you. Again, the issue of putting clarifications where there's some ambiguity in our governor's emergency powers is included in this bill. And one thing this does is it recognizes that the requirement for the legislature to come in within 2 days of a gubernatorial emergency is only required for public health emergency. There's no requirement for the legislature to come in pandemic flu emergencies, energy emergencies, other emergencies. And I think this bill clarifies that and sets, I think, appropriately sets the requirement that the governor has 30 days of emergency powers really without any legislative approval. And that's a pretty vast power. And I think it's because of all the things we understand, this bill doesn't seek to change that at all. What it does do is it recognizes that, again, in the context of an emergency declaration of power, the governor has that for any of the emergencies that the governor should choose to call those for, any of those four, for 30 days without limitation. What it does do is it recognizes what this subcommittee brought up before was the idea of successive emergencies sort of banded together. Again, this says nothing about our current governor or previous governors. It's just the broad issue of gubernatorial power. Other states in this last 12 months have seen circumstances where the governor's term of an emergency power ended, and without legislative approval, they terminated that emergency and immediately called a new emergency and could band those together. That didn't happen in Georgia. Our governor's been a model of how to manage this. But as we understand the contours of this and look at what other states have wrestled with, we can imagine circumstances where we might be just like they, because our laws are structured that way as it stands today. What this bill does, Mr. Chairman, it recognizes on lines 18 and 19 of the bill that an emergency declaration can be called for the governor for a 30-day period without legislative approval each 90 days. So conceivably every quarter you could have another 30-day emergency called by the governor, no legislative oversight, no legislative approval. And that's what this bill seeks to recognize. It gives the governor that broad power to address these kinds of situations. What this bill does do, if the governor wanted more than a 30-day emergency declaration over the course of any 90-day period, that's when the legislature would have to act and validate it as is required today at the 2-day point. So that issue of some potential future governor stacking emergency declarations back to back to get around this legislative approval to go beyond 30 days is addressed in line 18 and 19 of the bill in a way that I think gives even broader discretion to the governor perhaps than now. But again, within the bounds contemplated by the bill. Lines 23 to 23 address another question that's been raised. Why is it then when this public health emergency is called, does the legislature have to come down on the second day at 8 o'clock in the morning? Might there be a circumstance when more time's needed to come down? I know that's been raised by our executive branch. And what the substitute contemplates is at our normal convening time of 10 a.m., anytime between the second day and the 21st day. So if the governor has 30 days of emergency powers, they're granted automatically without any legislative oversight. There'd be a 20-day window at the governor's choosing. We could be called in on day 2, 3, 4, all the way through day 21. That would give us ample time to discuss and deliberate upon and act on the provisions, the resolution before that 30-day period were to end. But we've got a 20-day window now as opposed to date certain 2 days after the emergency is called, which as a logistical matter might be undoable for us.
So that's saying no less than 2 or no more than 21?
No less than 2, no more than 21, yes, sir.
Okay.
And again, on lines 28 through 30, this is where really the heart of the bill comes in. that the legislature could, by concurrent resolution, approve any number of successive periods, 90 days at a time. So after this 30-day period, we could be called in by the governor, extended 90 days. So, with one legislative vote, the governor could have 120 days, 4 months of emergency powers, after which we could come in ourselves or be called back in and reassemble for the next 90 days. But essentially, because of the vast, broad powers given a Georgia governor under emergency powers provision, a check-in every quarter, given these kinds of circumstances, shouldn't be an undue burden on the process. I know our executive branch has told me 30 days is too choppy, it's too much, there's just too much going on. So we recognize, rather than some other states contemplating 30-day or 60-day maximums, we think 90 days, that's consistent with something that's very different, but maybe analogous. The idea of, the president's war powers that goes for 90 days, and then the Congress has to act by resolution. So it's not unlike that, given that these circumstances aren't just 2-week flashes in the pan or 1-month issues. We've been under the state of emergency for going on a year now. That a check-in once a quarter, I believe, is a matter of policy, is the right approach. And then, Mr. Chairman, beginning on line 41, again, it just designates that there can be limitations, within the totality of emergency powers. The legislature can work with the governor and prescribe a certain scope to it. I've had members come to me really from both parties that have raised questions that, given the vastness of governor's powers under our current system, again, not speaking to our current governor or any particular governor, but just broadly our gubernatorial power, that there could be states of emergencies. In fact, in March, there are members that in our body that contemplated not even voting to give emergency powers just because they're so vast and sort of hard to get your hands around. But that if we have a circumstance where that scope could be perhaps made more appropriate to the nature of an emergency, or as you progress through the course of the year, maybe broader powers could be given earlier on, but some of those could be maybe dialed in a little bit over the course of 90 days, 180 days, or a year. It gives an ability to sort of manage that where an appropriate level of legislative consent's present, but the governor still has the broad powers to act in sort of a unitary way to execute the program. The last thing, Mr. Chairman, is the amendment that you see. That should be appended. It was intended to be appended, and if it pleases the committee, could be after line 174. And it states that the concurrent resolutions of the General Assembly could be authorized here at the Capitol, could be authorized in some alternate location, which is contemplated in other parts of law, or virtually. Representative Bruce from Fulton raised the question, hey, should we be able to convene virtually? And this would say definitively in the emergency powers law, we could convene and pass or deliberate and pass a concurrent resolution virtually by Zoom or otherwise. However, not by proxy. It wouldn't. This clarifies it would not allow proxy voting. You couldn't. The gentleman from the 103rd, myself, couldn't give Representative Scoggins our proxy to vote for us. That's just not something we do. And although your judgment might be stronger than ours, it's just not conventionally how we do things. And all this according to the rules of the House and the Senate. That's
okay, ladies and gentlemen, any questions for the author? What number? 7.
All right, Chairman Setzer, thank you for your bill. I like the bill. But something just occurred to me. I was looking at the effective date on here, and it'd be upon governor's signature or July 1st.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens if we're still in this emergency? Does this kick in and then we have to do a call to be in? And especially as the governor renews his call for the emergency.
Sure. I think the gentleman's question, I think putting a date certain of July 1st would probably be a good approach. There's no ambiguity there. Mm-hmm. This bill does not have a transition provision that says in the transition, these shall be in place. We don't do that.
Yeah.
So I think in essence, I'd be comfortable with the current provisions going through July 1. So looking forward to that, in anticipation of that, we could have we could move into this in an organized way versus there being some uncertainties upon the governor's signature. I would agree
Okay.
with that.
But we would, after July 1st, we would be called in to set the parameters of his emergency call. Is that correct?
As I would see this being applied is July 1st, there'd be a 30-day period the governor would have, so that by July 31st, we would have to come in and extend it beyond that for a 90-day period. That's how that would apply.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Representative.
Yeah, I couldn't find the raise your hand button on here. My
Okay.
apologies. I just wanted to acknowledge and thank the representative for adding that amendment. I know I was going to make that amendment, but he added it. So I just wanted to say thank you for doing that.
And to the gentleman's question, we looked at where it would go. We added it as a whole new subsection, so it would apply to every concurrent resolution here that General Assembly acted on would have that virtual provision. So it's not limited. You know, there's a number of places where the General Assembly would engage that are kind of throughout this bill. So it does apply to the entire code section.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, is this amendment that you passed out, is that included in this substitute already?
Now, the amendment was intended to be in the substitute.
Right.
There was a mix-up in council today. So if the amendment's going to be included, someone would need to move that and add that in the substitute for it to be included.
That was going to be my.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. So then I'd like to do that. If
Okay.
Is this the appropriate time?
Okay, Representative Bruce, let's wait till we see if there's any other discussion, and then I'll be acceptable to your amendment motion.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. Okay, if there's no other discussion, and Representative Bruce, you're going to bring the amendment motion?
Yes.
Okay,
I'd like to move that we add the amendment that is attached to your document as worded there.
okay. Just one second. We're going to wait for a motion. Okay, motion to pass. Second. Okay, now Representative Bruce, we're ready for your amendment.
Okay, I'd like to propose that we amend using the language that's provided to you in the document there.
Okay, is that AM 281823?
Yeah, I don't have it right here in front of me.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Could I have a copy of that, please? Real quick?
Okay,
Yeah,
any-
I do have it. It's what, LC 280240.
And the amendment is AM 281823. It's word for word with the language you've got, Representative Bruce.
Okay, thank you.
okay, any discussion on the amendment? Okay, we have a motion for the amendment. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Amendment is adopted. All right, any further discussion on this bill? No? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just appreciate the committee's deliberation and input, and I just, the broad support for it from the subcommittee, and I just appreciate your consideration, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, do we have a motion? We have a motion, I'm sorry. For committee substitute, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? We're good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
You're on the full committee.
Appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Are we done?
We have two more bills.
Okay, the screen went blank. That's what I was asking. Oh, there you go.
I'm sorry.
The screen had gone blank. That's why I was wondering what was going on.
We have two more bills.
Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is for House Bill 536, LC 345742 EC. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Representative Luricky, if you'll tell us about the bill.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. And I bring House Bill 536 to you today. And under the 38351, the emergency powers of the governor, there are several listed in there that are do's and don'ts for the governor under those emergency powers. And what this does is under the current code section, it only goes down through, I think it goes down through J. And we're just adding K. And what this legislation does is that no power granted under the provisions of this code section, the emergency powers code section, shall be utilized to specifically limit the practice of religion. And I'm sure that everyone has recognized over the last year some of the challenges of the governors that the governors have under these emergency powers. Some were unintended consequences of some actions taken by governors, and some of them were intended. And so what this seeks to do is just prohibit a governor from limiting or prohibiting the practice of religion under those emergency powers. And that's what the bill seeks to do.
Okay, any questions for the author?
I have a question, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to understand where the line is drawn. You know, as we all know, the virus that we're currently dealing with happened at well, I won't say it totally there, but in large part happened at a religious ceremony, a funeral, but it was a religious ceremony. So are we talking about any religious ceremony? Or are we talking specifically about, you know, what happens in a church building? I mean, I guess I'm not clear because, you know, this virus spread pretty quick because of a church, because of a religious service.
Go ahead.
Well, there's a couple of lines that have been drawn. One of those lines is that when under the emergency powers of the governor during this COVID-19 pandemic, there have been guidelines that are set. And those guidelines may say no more than 50 people with sufficient space for social distancing, wearing masks and those kind of things. So those are one lines. And in the example that you use, those guidelines were not followed. And so where we had these hot spots were in funerals or even perhaps in some religious practices in churches where the guidelines were not followed initially until churches began to understand what those guidelines were. The other line that was drawn, Representative Bruce, is that the Hasidic Jewish community in New York challenged Governor Cuomo because the guidelines were so strict as to prohibit the traditions of their faith practice. And so there are a couple of lines. Now, I think perhaps what would answer your question best is this bill seeks to prevent a governor from specifically targeting faith practices. If the governor issues a broad requirement or a broad guideline for all businesses, then it would include faith practices. Like I said, the number of people, the mask guidelines and those things. And so I don't know if that answers your question completely, but there are lines that cannot be crossed even in this if those guidelines and the governor's emergency powers are broad across every part of the state and in every situation. They just couldn't specifically target the practice of religion.
Okay, well, let me try a different example if I could. Um, you know, I go to a church that has about 3,000 members. And if the governor says that that people cannot gather in groups of more than 10, would that restrict this church from being able to have service?
Well, the example I used was that example exactly with the Hasidic Jewish community and Governor Cuomo. They won that in front of the Supreme Court, that Governor Cuomo could not prohibit them from their faith practices because the requirements that he put on them was too strict for the traditions of their faith. And so the Supreme Court ruled that the Hasidic Jewish community could continue to practice.
Okay, so in this case, they would still be able to have 3,000 people.
Not if they can't meet the guidelines of what's set broadly for the state. You can't cram 3,000 people into a building without the adequate space for social distancing.
I think it's going to be confusing, but okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for the author? Okay, hearing none, we have one witness, I believe, Cole Muzio. Yeah, Muzio. Come on in, sir. Let you have a seat here in the middle. And tell us who you are and if you're representing someone.
Yeah, I'm Cole Muzio. I'm the president of Family Policy Alliance of Georgia.
Okay.
And we're here to express support for the bill. It's rare that someone given a great deal of power exercises it judiciously. And it's even rarer that they're willing to set aside power absolutely. And so we are very enthusiastically supportive of a bill that would restrain the ability to constrain the free practice of worship in our state. There is not a time where you can completely suspend the First Amendment in this country, and our emergency power shouldn't reflect that. And so we support the governor's bill, support Representative Laricchia and the work that he's doing on this. It's an important bill. I think it's a balanced bill. There are some parameters that you can put around the First Amendment at times that are important to keep in mind, but this is one that makes sure that we are not expressly limiting the freedom of religion in our state. And so we're very supportive of the governor, appreciate his efforts and his willingness to look to the future and look to the now, and appreciate the representative for carrying this piece of legislation.
Thank you for being here today.
Happy to do it.
Any questions for this witness? None? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Representative Laricchia, do you want to add anything to your explanation of the bill before we ask for a vote?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. I just hope that it's clear. And if people did have any questions, we'd love to answer them now, because I wouldn't want anyone to miss the blessing of being able to vote in favor of this bill.
Okay. Okay, any other discussion from any of the committee members? If no, I'll entertain a motion. Have a do pass in a second. All those in favor of the bill, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
You're on the full committee.
There now. Thank y'all very much. First time in front of Judiciary, not very painful. That's right. Yeah. Let the governor, I think he knew that's why it's like a two-line bill. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're waiting on Representative Carpenter. He had a kind of a conflict, but he should be here shortly. Appreciate your patience.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late. I apologize.
What are you apologizing for? Oh, we lost you.
Sorry guys, I'm over here trying to help gaming in the state of Georgia at the same time, so it's a real complicated day for me. I'm getting pulled in a lot of ways.
I understand. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is for House Bill 468, LC 500195S. Is that correct, Representative
That's correct.
Carpenter?
That's correct, Chairman. Thank you so much.
Okay, you want to tell us about your bill?
Yeah, it's a really simple bill, and let me tell you why I'm bringing it. Okay, if we learned anything throughout COVID pandemic is that, unfortunately, governments have picked winners and losers, and a lot of times it's been big businesses have been allowed to stay open, and small businesses have not. So what this bill would address is that anytime during a public health emergency, if a business can meet the rules and the safety measures put down by the governor in these public health emergencies, if a business can meet that, then they can stay open and operate. I don't know how it happened in your community, but in my community, restaurants were closed down, and Walmart and Kroger and Lowe's and Home Depot are allowed to stay open because they were deemed essential. And so what this does is, look, if they can figure out a way to operate safely, small businesses should be allowed to as well. And that's really all this does. It's a simple bill. We've discussed the bill with the governor's team. He made some suggestions. It includes other organizations as well, as you see on line 12 and 13. But other than that, it's just a simple bill that says, look, if we're going to allow some people to operate, we need to allow anybody that can meet those requirements to operate. And I'll yield for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Representative Carpenter. Any questions or discussion from the committee? Okay, Chairman Administration.
I think the one question I have is just with this comply in line 16 complies with all applicable health and safety measures. Is there any concern, Chairman Carpenter, about ambiguity as to what those measures are that these businesses, I keep thinking of businesses, will be required to follow, or is that going to be clearly spelled out so they'll know what they need to adhere to?
I think so. I think, if I think we've seen through the executive order process that they have clearly been defined. And I think that's the case. They're clearly defined. If I can follow them, then we should, I should be able to operate at the end of the day. If they don't define anything, then I don't think it would require them to do anything to operate. But if there are health measures, sorry for the background noise, if there are health measures that the governor puts out and we're able to follow it, then we can operate.
Okay, any other questions for the author of the bill? If not, we have one witness, Nathan Humphrey. Humphrey, if you'll come on in.
Northeast College, goes through Sandy Springs, goes through North DeKalb, picks up that little 3/4 part of Gwinnett.
Come on in. How you doing today?
Doing good. I was listening to you on my phone and there's a little bit of a delay.
Okay. If you have a seat and tell us who you are and who you're
Yes,
with.
sir. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Nathan Humphrey. I'm with the NFIB. We represent Georgia's small business owners, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I appreciate Representative Carpenter bringing this bill up. As you know, COVID's been a pretty challenging time, particularly for small business owners. But one thing that they have shown is remarkable ability to adapt and figure out how to operate. I mean, innately, small business owners are problem solvers, and they're good at that. And not only have they adapted their business model to figure out how to figure out the challenges of supply chain disruption and all the other things on the business side, but they've also been very creative and adaptive to come up with ways to keep their employees safe and their customers safe in the operation of their business.
Mm-hmm.
And we really appreciate in Georgia how Governor Kemp basically put the responsibility on the business owner and said, here's the guidelines, here's what we want you to do from a health standpoint. If you can figure out a way how to do it, then you can remain open. Unfortunately, what we've seen in other states is small business owners were never even given the opportunity to adapt and figure out how to keep their business open and to keep paychecks going to their employees. So this simple bill is just an opportunity to recognize that issue and to protect business owners in the future.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Humphrey. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Humphrey? Okay, seeing none, thank you for coming
Thank
today.
you. Appreciate it.
Okay. No other discussion. I'll entertain a motion. Okay, we have a do pass and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Good. Okay, thank you, Representative Carpenter.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I
Wonderful
appreciate it. I
committee.
apologize. I'm having to do it from the hallway.
Thank you. No problem. Have a good day. Ladies and gentlemen, we're adjourned.